24/7 News Source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America, N.A. Copyright 2023.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
There's a breeze still coming out of Crypto.com Arena this morning in downtown LA. A lot of Lakers fans are exhaling a sigh of relief after the Lakers had to work overtime to beat a shorthanded Minnesota team by 6 in the NBA's play-in round. LeBron, at age 38, played 45 minutes and finished with 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists. Dennis Schroeder was clutch off the bench all night. Schroeder hit a three-pointer with 1.1 seconds left in regulation and sank 2 free throws with 8 seconds left in OT. The win clinches the 7th seed for the Lakers in the Western Conference and sends them into a first-round matchup with the Memphis Grizzlies. Game 1 in the best-of-7 series is Sunday in Memphis. Tip-off at noon on ABC. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Stand up and fight!
When news breaks, you can count on KBLA Talk 1580 for exclusive interviews.
You're listening to A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte. Incredibly delighted to welcome Tennessee State Representative Justin Pearson. Brother, welcome to the show.
As Tennesseans, as Americans, as people of conscience, our responsibility is to get proximate to this movement. This is the moment. Folks always wonder, is this the time for me to start using my voice for speaking up, for advocating for issues? This is it.
This is it.
The present moment where we are seeing the erosion of democracy, where we're seeing duly elected officials being expelled because we're raising the issue about the need to end gun violence and protect communities. And so for everyone who has ever had a thought that I need to do something, I need to be engaged, this is the moment to transform our cities, our counties, our states, and the United States of America.
Weekdays, weekends. Stay tuned to KBLA Talk 1580 for the conversations that matter most to you. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Live from Leimert Park, USA, I'm Tavis, Smiley. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580. So glad to see you and me back in stride again. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. All of our socials can be found at KBLA 1580. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Everything at KBLA 1580. Let me also invite you to download our app and listen to us anywhere in the world in real time, but only by downloading the app right now at KBLA 1580. Should you miss us any day in real time, check out the podcast of our program by going to the app, the website, Anchor, Spotify, Apple, so many places to get the podcast and listen at your leisure should you miss us any day in real time. But I am delighted to have you along live with us today for the next 3 hours. You can also watch the live stream of this program by tapping on the KBLA TV icon on our app or by going to our YouTube channel. Let me also invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, have you been following the most recent Clarence Thomas drama? Gallivanting around the world on a super yacht and private jet owned and paid for by conservative billionaire mega donor Harlan Crow, receiving all kinds of gifts and favors. So, is Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas a corrupt, plutocrat-backed ruling class elite? Jacobin columnist Ben Burgess thinks so, and he'll join us today to talk about all the Clarence Thomas drama that you may or may not be aware of in hour 2. In our third hour, what's it really like when you're feeling the strain of trying to educate students while adhering to obstructive and sometimes destructive parameters like banning certain books and topics in the classroom? A conversation in hour 3 with writer, media personality, and school principal, Dr. Shanessa Fenner, on what's hindering educators most in the classroom in this current climate of politics. But in this first hour today, on Monday, the Nashville Metropolitan Council voted to return Justin Jones to the state legislature after he was expelled, of course, last week by Republicans for protesting gun violence on the House floor. Though his return was celebrated by many, the removal of Representative Jones and Representative Justin Pearson, who was on this program days ago, on this station days ago, their removal underscores the troubling reality that some Republicans seem more concerned by protest than gun violence, and that these kinds of, shall we call them, toxic reactions are fraught with racial symbolism and dog whistles. Bloomberg opinion columnist Francis Wilkinson joins us now for a conversation about all that and then some, I suspect. Francis, good to have you back. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, Tavis. Nice to be with you.
Nice to have you on, man. Thank you for your time. Let me ask a big question, a broad question, and we'll narrow our way, Francis, as we move through this hour. I've not had a chance to ask you this, although I've talked to many others. Your take, broadly speaking, on what you saw happen in that Tennessee assembly.
Well, my comprehension of it was that it was an overt act. Mm-hmm. You talked about dog whistles just a minute ago there. This was not a dog whistle. Mm-hmm. This was a very explicit act expelling 2 young black lawmakers who had the temerity to protest the inaction of the legislature in the face of another gun massacre. And as you also know, this harkens back to days of Reconstruction when black lawmakers were ejected from legislatures because the federal government could no longer protect black rights, basically, or refused to protect black rights at that point. So to me, this was not so much a dog whistle as an overt act of, hey, we are white conservatives asserting our power. We know that this wave, this generational and multiracial wave, is upon us, and we are fighting back against it.
Yeah. You said something now, Francis, as you often do in your writings, that make us think and that allow us to have a conversation about reframing the current moment. I say all the time, quoting one of my regular contributors, Connie Rice, brilliant lawyer here in Los Angeles. She always, encourages us to make sure when we're having these conversations that our frame is correct. And you've just offered a historical frame that not many people have talked about. We're talking about the present moment in Tennessee, but most, to your point, are unaware, I think, of the historic framing of this vis-a-vis Reconstruction and those black leaders back then who were forced out of various positions, as you sort of detail. How many? I guess my question is, do you think that most of us might see this differently? Yeah, that's the question. Would we see it differently if we understood historically that this ain't the first time this has happened to black legislators?
Well, no, it's not the first time. And I think of a man named Tunis Campbell, who's the highest-ranking black man in the Georgia legislature, who was basically just pushed out of his seat in, I think, 1871, because at that time, white conservatives, who were Democrats in those days, were reasserting their control over politics, over the economy, over society in the former slave states. The coincidence of this with guns, I think, is also worthy of attention, because obviously at the same time that they were kicking black legislators out of power, kicking black local politicians out of power and others, they were also making sure that there was free rein for armed white terrorism to reduce black power in other ways. So I think the fact that this episode happened over a contest over guns, if you take it a step back, the expulsion was over a protest, and the protest was over inaction on gun regulation. I think that link between guns and white power is a pretty powerful one as well.
It is powerful, and we'll talk about that as we move to this hour. That combination, if you will, that conjoining of guns and white power, white supremacist power, we will talk about that. We'll talk about this gun culture that continues to be wrapped and warped by racial aggression. We will talk about how brazen, Francis puts his finger on it quite nicely, the overt act that this was. He challenged me correctly that this was not a dog whistle, Tavis. This was overt, it was brazen, and I want to get his take on what he makes of the fact that it was, in fact, so overt, so brazen, so unapologetic on the part of Republicans in a moment such as this. A great deal to unpack in this hour with Bloomberg opinion columnist Francis Wilkinson, who you're listening to right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
Hi, it's Lynn Richardson with the Millionaires Roundtable. Have you heard about Lendistry? Come on now. Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered right here in LA. Once you've started your business, Lendistry provides flexible financing options starting at $50,000 to help you access the affordable capital needed to grow. Whether financing is needed to increase working capital, acquire a business, purchase inventory and equipment, or refinance debt, Lendistry has a solution for you. Lending products range from traditional business term loans and lines of credit to SBA 7A loans and commercial real estate financing. Lendistry's pre-application process is simple and does not impact your credit score. Visit lendistry.com/KBLA. That's LENDISTRY.com/KBLA to learn more and get started with an application right on the website.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin ultra strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Okay. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
The double steak grilled cheese burrito is back at Taco Bell. And in case you didn't know, it's stacked. Yeah, packed inside it is a double serving of premium grilled marinated steak and a melty 3-cheese layer. Then on top of that, it has a layer of grilled bubbly cheese on the outside. Yeah, the outside. Why? Probably because it refuses to be caged in by the confines of its tortilla walls. Or maybe just to add more cheesy flavor.
Double steak grilled cheese burrito. Get one today, only at Taco Bell. And participate in U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only while supplies last. Double steak claim is compared to steak quesadilla. Contact store for hours of participation. Which
KBLA Talk 1580 congratulates U.S. Olympic gold medalist and Hall of Famer Jeanette Bolden Pickens, owner of the 27th Street Bakery, during this Women's History Month. 27th Street Bakery sends a huge thank you to the community for all its support during the pandemic, serving the Los Angeles community with their signature sweet potato pies since 1956 and third-generation baker. The goal has never changed. Keep the business thriving for generations to come. Made with the freshest ingredients in each yam peeled by hand. 27th Street Bakery puts the home back in homemade with its signature vanilla added to all its amazing products. Pies, cakes, cobblers, tea cakes, and the newest item, creamy sweet potato cheesecake. Call 323-233-3469. That's 323-233-3469. Have your order shipped by visiting 27thstreetbakery.com or stop by 2700 South Central Avenue, Los Angeles, California, 90001, Tuesdays through Saturdays, 8 to 4.
Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to Francis Wilkinson, Bloomberg opinion columnist here on KBLA Talk 1580 in today's first hour, and we're delighted to have him. You put your finger on this earlier, Francis, and I want to come right to it now, and that is and nobody's surprised by this, I guess, on the one hand, but it was so overt, so brazen. You beautifully situated this for us historically, back to the 1800s when they were doing this to black legislators in the era of Reconstruction. But what did you make of the brazen nature of this? They did this unapologetically, not under the cover of darkness, but in daylight.
Yes, it was something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, here's what I think, and that's the key question. It's not the key question, but it's certainly an interesting question you've raised, and I'm not sure I have an interesting answer for it. But let me give it a try.
Sure.
We are in a period now of reaction, right, where we're seeing these states where conservative whites are in power, and they are able to exert control over, for instance, a place like Nashville and Memphis, which do not necessarily want those laws, those cultural mores thrust down, their throats. So, what I think we're seeing is in a lot of these places there is a reaction against black power, against multiracial democracy, and I think where they are feeling insulated from that to some degree, at least in terms of the legality. And Tennessee is a state with conservative representation, right? They've got a conservative Republican governor. They've got a conservative legislature. I think they felt that they could sort of make an example of these two legislators and show that the wave of black power, the wave of multiracial democracy was going to stop at the door of the legislature. And I think they found out that that is not the case because if you look at the consequences, they have been humiliated really nationwide. And we already, of course, have one of the black lawmakers is back in the legislature already, and presumably the other one will be as well. So they lost on a practical level in that it's not going to remove these two men, and they lost on a political and symbolic level because there was almost no way to describe the actions except in terms of racism and racial aggression and reaction.
Speaking of racial aggression and reaction, we'll get to, again, the conversation more broadly in a moment about this gun culture wrapped in all of that, steeped in all of that. But since you mentioned multiracial democracy, what does this incident say to you about that? I was going to call it impending reality. It is, because we know we're just years away from being a majority-minority country, but it's not even that deep for me. What's it say in real time about our effort to establish, to extend a multiracial democracy?
Well, I think it's another reminder that there is a large part of this country that does not want a multiracial democracy. We have seen that with the MAGA movement behind Trump. We see it in Trump's rhetoric continually. We see it in the kind of rhetoric you hear on Fox News, the invasion, the great replacement of white people in the United States by brown and black people. So there is a large cohort of America that does not want that and is actively pushing back against that. And I think that's what we saw the Republicans in the Tennessee legislature do. I think, to me at least, I'd be interested to hear your take on this, but to me at least, it means we still have a big contest ahead.
Yeah.
And that this is going to be a very a fierce battle for some time. And just because we are demographically heading toward that moment where it will no longer be a white majority, we are not going to get to that multiracial democracy without a lot of work.
Yeah. To your kind invitation for me to chime in with my view on this, not a whole lot to say. My view is not much different than yours. I think it portends something very ugly, very nasty, and vitriolic for our future. This is not going to come easy. We will not go into that good night gently, to borrow a phrase. We had a guest on our program yesterday, Francis, who has a book out, and the subtitle of the book essentially is about a slow civil war that we are witnessing right now, the rollout of a very, very slow civil war. When I first saw the book and invited you out on the program, I did so because I obviously wanted to unpack what he had to say. But I thought, on some level, when I first read it, maybe that's a bit hyperbolic. That we are, maybe you're doing a little too much there, calling this present moment a rollout of a very slow civil war. And when I got done with that conversation for an hour yesterday, I think I was convinced that what we're enduring right now may be the early stages of a very slow rollout of an impending civil war. You didn't hear that conversation, but your thoughts just on that notion. Is it that serious?
Well, I don't know. I'm wary of that as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I haven't read Jeff Charlotte's book yet, which is the one you're referring to.
Yeah,
right?
you know the name. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's obviously a political war at this point. Now, there's a huge difference between a political war and an actual fighting war, which we've had in this country. So I think that it is a fraught time. I think we are going to have some instances of violence. I will tell you that one of the things that I take a little bit of comfort in is if you look at the people who are angriest and most reactionary in this contest, in this political contest, they are people who tend to be older. So the base, for instance, of Trump's MAGA movement is older. And throughout history, it's very hard to find examples of movements comprised of older people that are really getting into serious, guerrilla warfare and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's sort of a young person's game, revolution. And so, while obviously there are clear calls to violence on the right, and there are obviously some people who are responding to that, and we saw that on January 6th, and we've seen it elsewhere. I think on the whole, the fact that it's in a movement, the fact that the base of it is older people, I think is a good thing.
Yeah. It's funny. I hadn't thought about that. That's why I love talking to you, Francis Wilkinson, Bloomberg opinion columnist, our guest right now. You always make me think about things I hadn't considered prior to. Hadn't thought about that. And I think one piece of evidence that I would submit, not that you need my help in making your argument, but one of the pieces of evidence I would submit as Exhibit A, perhaps, to bolster your point, is that all these rallies and protests that Trump has called for around his indictment have not materialized. And I think some of that has to do with
an excellent point.
Yeah, I think some of that has to do with the fact that you're right, that it's an older audience, an older following, and they're not interested in necessarily. They prefer Trump over Biden, but they ain't trying to take to the streets about that. Number one. Number two, I would offer as Exhibit B that they have watched the Department of Justice, although slow to my mind to start this rollout. Speaking of rollouts, they were slow, but a lot of folk had been arrested and indicted, and some jailed. Given their behavior and activity on January 6th at the Capitol. So that also is a deterrent for some people to act a fool. But I think your point though overall is a good one. Again, hadn't thought about it in that regard, but as you were talking, I'm thinking historically about all the movements. And to my mind, there is no movement for social progress in this country or frankly anywhere in the world, to your brilliant point, that did not at its apex, at its crescendo, have the engagement and the involvement of young people. That is true for the civil rights movement. It is true in Soweto, South Africa. It is true in Tiananmen Square in China. I could do this all day long. Again, making your point alongside you, that all these movements for any sort of real social momentum have always had young folk, the Black Lives Matter movement in real time. Young people at the epicenter of these struggles. And so I think you're right. Maybe I will take some solace in that because I hadn't thought about it until you teed it up. But it still leads me to another question, which is, while we might not be in the streets fighting as we were in the Civil War, But to your point about these political wars, and on some level, America's always engaged. We're perennially engaged in perennial wars. I mean, political wars. You got Republicans, Democrats. We're always fighting about something. But this one has a different feel, a different frame. And I'm wondering in the coming years what you think this kind of political war that we see coming, as Charlotte put it, a slow civil war, what's that ultimately going to do for or to our democracy, you think?
Well, I think there are two obvious divergent options here, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is that the reaction will succeed, at least for a time. And there will be the kind of repression of voting rights, repression of women's rights, repression of various minorities' rights in states where that is feasible, and even federally when that's possible. So that's the dark version of this, right? Which is that there is enough of a vicious reaction, and it's sufficiently organized that they can really not only hold back the change that's coming, but roll back rights that have already been gained. And we're looking at that right now, right, with abortion rights and voting rights and gay, lesbian, trans, etc. So, when they're banning books, you know that you're in a very bad period. Now, to me, there's also a much more hopeful path, and that entails exactly what you were just talking about, which is young people. Black Lives Matter, Soweto, whatever you call, the civil rights movement, it's always young people. If young people recognize the stakes of this and get involved, I think we have a very different outcome, and it's much sooner than this long simmering civil war that you're talking about. Because, even looking at Tennessee, which is hardly known as a bastion of liberal politics and progressivity, those kids came out. This started with a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
So, and they didn't back down either. So they have now been engaged, and in this political battle that they got engaged in, backing these two black legislators, they won. So what does that tell them? That if they get out, if they organize, if they raise their voices, they can win. That's a very important lesson to learn.
Nope, it is. I'm glad you pointed that out for us. I'm looking at my clock here. I've got news, traffic, and sports in 1 minute. Let me tell you where I want to go on the other side of all that business. I am concerned, and I shudder when I think about it. And again, you put your finger on it, and I want to come right back to it. And that is how much more scared we should be about whatever the future portends around these issues, namely multiracial democracy, when the protagonists are aided and abetted by a U.S. Supreme Court. You mentioned voting rights suppression. You mentioned women's reproductive freedom and other issues. But I'm concerned and want to get your temperature on how much more scared we ought to be frank about it, given that this movement on the right, these white supremacist attacks and beyond, are being aided and abetted by a U.S. Supreme Court. Then I want to come right to the piece you've been writing about of late, and that is this notion that you, again, also raised earlier of what it means that this particular protest in Tennessee, where these black folk were disrespected and pushed out, was wrapped around the notion of guns, and racial aggression was wrapped all around that. So a lot to talk about in that regard. Glad we got 30 more minutes here after news and traffic and sports with our guest, Bloomberg opinion columnist Francis Wilkinson on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The Environmental Protection Agency is proposing ambitious new vehicle pollution rules that could give the nation's auto industry a strong push toward electric vehicles over the next decade. White House and EPA officials say under the proposed emission standards released today, electric vehicles could account for up to 2/3 of new cars sold in this country by 2032. South Carolina Republican Senator, African-American Tim Scott, is forming an exploratory committee for a 2024 run for the White House. He's expected to make the announcement today in Iowa. If Scott runs, he'd be the second Republican from South Carolina seeking the office after former Governor Nikki Haley announced her bid back in February. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
We have a SIG alert for the Ventura Freeway in Encino. A stall has taken away the two left lanes, 101 westbound at Havenhurst. Traffic stop and go from Laurel Canyon Boulevard. Let's go to Long Beach Freeway in Vernon. Caltrans doing debris removal on the right shoulder, 710 northbound at Atlantic Boulevard. Traffic is jammed from Rosecrans Avenue. And a breakdown in Irvine, 5 northbound before Culver Drive. Stall car blocking the left lane.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America, N.A. Copyright 2023.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
There's a breeze still coming out of Crypto.com Arena this morning in downtown LA. A lot of Lakers fans are exhaling a sigh of relief after the Lakers had to work overtime to beat a shorthanded Minnesota team by 6 in the NBA's play-in round. LeBron, at age 38, played 45 minutes and finished with 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists. Dennis Schroeder was clutch off the bench all night. Schroeder hit a three-pointer with 1.1 seconds left in regulation and sank 2 free throws with 8 seconds left in OT. The win clinches the 7th seed for the Lakers in the Western Conference and sends them into a first-round matchup with the Memphis Grizzlies. Game 1 in the best-of-7 series is Sunday in Memphis. Tip-off at noon on ABC. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm young, gifted, and black. KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio that's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Made you look. Our Weekly Los Angeles is the largest audited black newspaper in the state of California with a distribution of over 50,000 copies weekly. Pick up a copy every Thursday to get the latest news on African American communities of LA. You can also keep up with what's going on in Los Angeles and surrounding cities by going to www.ourweekly.com. The Our Weekly website is updated daily with the current news about us and for us. For your advertising needs, Our Weekly offers economical advertising packages to fit your budget. Feel free to call Our Weekly Los Angeles at 323-905-1300 or visit the website at www.ourweekly.com. Our Weekly Los Angeles, reporting news that matters to you.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where everybody is somebody and nobody is a stranger. You belong here.
You you belong here. We're glad to have you here in this hour today, our first hour. Our guest is Francis Wilkinson. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580. 1-800-920-1580. Francis, before news, traffic, and sports, based on something you had said about a number of issues that this Supreme Court has taken up, or certainly will be taken up in other regards, we're waiting on a decision to, frankly, end affirmative action as we know it, just one of the decisions that we're waiting on from this particular court. But where this moment that we are in is already troubled, to say the least. They have a Supreme Court who, with various rulings, continue to aid and abet their efforts, and that makes this slow-rolling civil war, as Jeff Charlotte would put it, all the more difficult to wrap your brain around. Does it not?
I totally agree. I mean, it's not just the Supreme Court. It's a lot of lower courts that are exercising the same kind of expansive authority, trying to restrain the rights of women, the rights of minorities, in order to sort of keep a bulwark against the future. And one of the ways that I think that may cause problems for them, though. So it's sometimes power, if you abuse it, comes back and bites you, right? And we saw a little bit of that in Tennessee. So when Justice Thomas wrote the Bruin decision, which was a decision that struck down a New York law on gun possession, he said that the ruling was that you had to that the law had to be consistent with the way the country was either at the founding around 1791 or what's known as the second founding after the Civil War around 1868. And so based on that, the Fifth Circuit Court very recently struck down a federal law saying that domestic abusers cannot have guns or can have their guns removed, because in 1791 and 1868, there was no such thing as a domestic abuser.
Yep. I think we just lost Francis in the middle of his sentence. His phone died. We'll Miles will get him back on the line right quicker. We can continue our conversation. While we get him back on the line to finish his point, he just mentioned in the last few minutes two names that I want to kind of pull out right quick. He mentioned Justice Clarence Thomas. That was the story he was telling just now when his phone died. Justice Thomas is the topic of our second hour today, in case you've just tuned in our second hour. In case you've not been following it, Clarence Thomas is in hot water once again. ProPublica released a story a few days ago about a guy named Harlan Crow. Many of us know Harlan Crow from his politics, but Harlan Crow is a dear friend of Clarence Thomas. It turns out Clarence Thomas has been gallivanting around the world on a super yacht and private jet and receiving all kinds of gifts and favors from his billionaire friend Harlan Crow. And one has to ask, what does that relationship, given who Harlan Crow is, have on the decisions Clarence Thomas has been making and continues to make as a member of the Supreme Court? It's an ugly story that ProPublica broke, big exclusive about all the gifts and travel and other things that Clarence Thomas has received from Harlan Crow. There was a Supreme Court justice in 1969 who was forced to resign over far less stuff. And so there are those who think this may be the moment that Clarence Thomas may be forced to have a reckoning about his future on the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll talk about that in hour two. Francis also mentioned banning books. We will talk in hour three with a high school principal about what it's like when you're trying to educate students against a backdrop of obstructionist and sometimes destructionist rulings that make it difficult to teach children in classrooms. So since Francis mentioned banning books, that's hour three with a principal. Fascinating conversation, I think. I look forward to it. And since he mentioned Clarence Thomas, the subject of hour two today, now we have Francis back in this hour, who was making a point about Clarence Thomas when his phone died. Francis, finish your point about Clarence Thomas.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. It happens, man. Live radio, yeah.
My point is that Thomas issued a ruling that is going to have ramifications that make life difficult for conservatives on the court, because the logical implication of his ruling was that domestic abusers cannot have their guns taken away. Now, we know that domestic abusers are far more likely to murder their spouses.
Mm-hmm.
We know that domestic abusers are a disproportionate component of mass killers. And so it's an obviously commonsensical thing that domestic abusers should be prohibited from having a gun. And yet, by the logic of his ruling, as the Fifth Circuit has just ruled, you can't take a gun away from someone because no one took guns away from domestic abusers in 1791 or in 1868. So when they go too far, as they did in this ruling, and I think as they did in the legislature in Tennessee this month, you see that it creates more problems for them, even though it creates problems for us as well. In the long run, it does create the basis to say, we question your credibility because this ruling is, categorically nuts, or we question your credibility because you're showing naked aggression in this move to throw out these two black lawmakers. And, at some point, this is a pretty complex society, and credibility still matters in terms of governing and managing the society. And they've been doing a pretty serious damaged job on their own credibility over the last few years. And I think, Chief Justice John Roberts and others are concerned about that, as they should be, because the courts in particular cannot really function without some level of credibility.
Yeah. Let me pivot ever so gently, since you again set me up for this so nicely, to talk specifically about, again, you were talking a moment ago about some of your writings of late, but I want to come now to this specific conversation that you are encouraging us to have about what it means when we consider that gun culture was at the center of what happened in Tennessee, and that was warped by and wrapped in, of course, racial aggression. But just unpack what it means for us to consider that guns and race were connected in this Tennessee brouhaha.
Well, I think it's because guns and race have been connected in American life for a very long time. Obviously, in the early days of the Republic, guns were something that were seen as a way to keep down slave rebellions. They were seen as a way for whites to keep black people, even free black people, in line. And not exercising rights that the whites did not want them to have. After Reconstruction, white terrorists, the Ku Klux Klan and others, used guns to murder blacks trying to vote, murder blacks who had voted the wrong way, and terrorize blacks who were, being too successful in business or, whatever the cause of the white reaction was. Guns were part of that, and disarming blacks was a part of that. So guns have been part of racial politics from the very beginning of this country, and they still are part of racial politics. If you listen to the rhetoric of the National Rifle Association, it's all about fear, and underlying that really is fear of black crime, black people. Donald Trump has done that extensively. He's talked about black neighborhoods being so dangerous that you can't buy a loaf of bread without being shot. So this creation of fear, which is also what drives gun sales, because hunting has been in decline for many decades in the United States. Gun sales are really about fear. So if you want to market guns, you market fear. And if you want to increase, white reaction and get whites worried about crime and worried about things that tends to move them toward the conservative political choices, you use fear. This is all very well established. So guns have been intertwined with American politics and American racial politics in particular as long as this country has existed.
That's why I love reading Francis Wilkinson's work in Bloomberg. He's a Bloomberg opinion columnist because he always makes it so simple. He just brings it straight home. You heard that line, right? And he's right. It's a data point, but he says it so forthrightly that hunting is down and yet gun sales are up. Think about that. The sport of hunting in this country has been decreasing for years. So we're not using these weapons to go hunting. Then again, as I think about it, they are hunting. They just hunting for black folk as opposed to beaver or bear or antelope, whatever they hunt for. They're hunting black folk. But hunting is down in this country. Gun sales remain up and rising steadily. And to his point, you want to sell guns, you sell fear. You don't sell hunting season. You sell fear. It's a powerful point. Francis Wilkinson is our guest in this hour of Bloomberg Opinion columnist. More to talk with Francis about when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to here with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580.
LA Mayor Karen Bass and the city attorney announced Skid Row housing preservation and rehab initiative. Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News. LA Mayor Karen Bass and city attorney Heidi Feldstein Soto recently announced an initiative to preserve and rehabilitate 2,000 housing units in Skid Row. The announcement comes after the Skid Row Housing Trust's recent communication that it would no longer be able to operate the 29 buildings it runs across the city. So this new plan will turn the city's aging downtown real estate into housing for the homeless. In reference to this plan, the mayor says that failure is not an option. Losing nearly 2,000 units of housing would be devastating to Skid Row, and it would be felt citywide, and people would lose their lives. What do you think about this new plan? Let us know on all socials at KBLA 1580.
The FAA will be hiring air traffic controllers soon. Applications open June 24th through June 27th. If you know someone between the ages of 18 and 30 who might be interested, please tell them to go to www.faa.gov/BE-ATC to apply today. The salary range is $103,000 to $164,000. There's also paid training and school. Again, that's www.faa.gov/BE-ATC. Again, that's www.faa.gov/BE-ATC to apply to be an air traffic controller. This community call to action is brought to you by the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals and KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 congratulates U.S. Olympic gold medalist and Hall of Famer Jeanette Bolden Pickens, owner of the 27th Street Bakery, during this Women's History Month. 27th Street Bakery sends a huge thank you to the community for all its support during the pandemic, serving the Los Angeles community with their signature sweet potato pie since 1956 and third-generation baker. The goal has never changed. Keep the business thriving for generations to come. Made with the freshest ingredients in each yam peeled by hand. 27th Street Bakery puts the home back in homemade with the signature vanilla added to all its amazing products. Pies, cakes, cobblers, tea cakes, and the newest item, creamy sweet potato cheesecake. Call 323-233-3469. That's 323-233-3469. Have your order shipped by visiting 27thstreetbakery.com or stop by 2700 South Central Avenue, Los Angeles, California, 90001, Tuesdays through Saturdays, 8 to 4.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
It does indeed with Francis Wilkinson, our guest in this hour from Bloomberg. Francis, I'm wondering whether or not you think this course correction that I was going to say that the Tennessee Assembly is undertaking. They're not undertaking; it's being forced on them. As I said, the Nashville Metropolitan Council has voted to return Justin Jones to the state legislature. As you said, we expect the same will happen here momentarily for Justin Pearson. So both Justins will be back in the Tennessee State Assembly before too long. I'm wondering whether or not you think the embarrassing loss, as you put it, that Republicans suffered in Tennessee, this course correction, as it were, will mean anything. I don't want to color the question much more than that. Does it mean anything going forward?
I think we've already got an answer to that in that Tennessee Governor Bill Lee has called for a red flag law in the state, which is a law to remove guns from people who are dangerous either to themselves or to others. That was not on the table before. So, I think we've seen young people in Tennessee, which is not a state, again, that is, particularly amenable to progressive young people. We've seen them win this fight to reinstall at least one of these legislators so far. And the repercussions of that are that they're already seeing some limited but significant action on trying to constrain gun violence. So the lesson that they have learned from raising their voices is, hey, this kind of works. So yes, I think there are repercussions already being felt in Tennessee, and I think they were nationwide as well because it was a national story. And for Republicans, one thing that it did was add another piece of information, another piece of evidence that they are not on the side of the young people in this country who want to see changes.
We were talking earlier about the Civil War, and we will see in the coming years, I suspect, whether Jeff Charlotte is right, that we are at the beginning, the early stages of a slow Civil War rollout. But you can't talk about the Civil War, obviously, without talking about the North and the South. And it seems to me that we are having far too many conversations about out-of-control politicians in the South, be it Florida, be it Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, all across North Carolina, all across the South Carolina, the comments of Nikki Haley of late and others, all across the South. We're keeping watch, as it were, and track of a variety of political issues. Let me just ask how closely you're watching the South.
Well, I'm interested in American politics, and if you're interested in American politics, you have to watch the South very closely.
Yeah.
Because that's the lever of conservative politics in the United States. And you may have conservatives in California, which you do. You have millions. You have them in Montana. You have them wherever. But the sort of ideological and cultural home of both the Republican Party and American conservatism is the South, and it has been for a very, very long time.
Our remaining moments with Francis Wilkinson when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We may be LA's newest talk station, but when you're punching above your weight, it's not about whether you can throw a punch. Can you take a punch? We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. And we don't black down. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 joins you in standing for education as a right, not a privilege. Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science is a private, non-profit, community-founded, student-centered university committed to cultivating diverse health profession leaders who are dedicated to social justice and health equity for underserved populations. CDU does this through outstanding education, clinical service, and community engagement. Recently, Charles Drew University made history by opening only the 5th medical school at an historically black university. Congratulations, South LA, and congratulations to the Dean of the medical school, Dr. Deborah Protho-Stith. CDU is now training doctors and providing $90 million in annual economic benefit to Watts and surrounding neighborhoods. To apply for medical school, get more information, or sign your child up for the Junior Doctors Saturday School program, visit cdrewu.edu. That's cdrewu.edu. At KBLA, we are dedicated to equity in education and ending healthcare apartheid, and we don't black down. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Nerds. Here at NerdWallet, we often see people wrestle with financial decisions.
Mike is in the ring, up against his nemesis, indecision. Mike can't decide the best way to save his money, and indecision has him boxed in. But wait, Mike tagged in NerdWallet.
Whew, let's go. With NerdWallet's side-by-side comparisons, you can find a high-yield savings account with interest rates that earn more bank for your buck. So the next time you wrestle with a financial decision, you'll come out on top. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dominique DePrima from the show First Things First, weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Join me tomorrow with cosmetic dermatologist Dr. Paul Wallace. We'll look at body sculpting technology, what's safe and what's ratchet. Plus, headlines, hot topics, and your phone calls. Only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, can potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Got just 3 minutes left in conversation with Bloomberg opinion columnist Francis Wilkinson. Francis, your point earlier, notwithstanding that the governor of Tennessee has been moved by all of this, one could argue, to propose a red flag law in the state of Tennessee to take guns away from persons who are a danger to themselves and potentially others. So I hear your point that maybe what happened in Tennessee vis-a-vis these 2 black legislators who were expelled, one now returned, the other soon to be, I suspect. I hear your point that maybe something good has come of this. On the other hand, I wonder to what extent you think the NRA, who you referenced earlier, and other gun enthusiasts in this political battle are celebrating the fact that they were able to focus our attention on the protest, to focus our conversation on the expulsions rather than guns. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand that. I mean, obviously, diversion and distraction are their standard sort of response to any mass shooting.
Exactly.
Mass shooting brings home, just how dangerous guns are. I still think, pound for pound, I think the black legislators and their allies got the best of this fight.
Yeah. I think you're right. I hope you're right. And certainly the return of Justin Pearson to his seat alongside Justin Jones would go a long way to advancing that particular narrative. I think you're right. But I guess we will know in the coming days whether you and I are on the right side of this. We know we're on the right side of the issue. Whether or not we think we're right about the fact that they got the better of it, we shall see. For now, we thank Francis Wilkinson, Bloomberg opinion columnist covering U.S. politics and policy, for joining us in this hour. Francis, we'll do it again. All the best to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tavis. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure is always mine. Trust and believe. I thank you for this opportunity over the course of this hour. In our second hour, as I said a little bit earlier, we are going to be joined by Ben Burgess, who is a columnist for Jacobin. I guess the first 2 hours today are all about columnists. Francis, a columnist with Bloomberg. Ben Burgess, a columnist with Jacobin. But I love talking to columnists. I love hearing their points of view and being able to interrogate how they see the world. So Ben Burgess believes that Clarence Thomas is a corrupt, plutocrat-backed ruling class elite. That is the name of the piece that he has recently written for Jacobin, and it's all about the drama that Clarence Thomas has found himself in, taking free gifts and free travel from this billionaire named Harlan Crow. If you haven't been following the story, we'll unpack it for you in the next hour and talk about whether or not this is that moment. As we like to say, that part. Is this that part of the story, where the tide finally turns against Clarence Thomas. He's now the longest-serving member of the U.S. Supreme Court. But in 1969, a member of the court was forced to resign over something far less. And when you're taking gifts and free trips, et cetera, maybe the time has come for you to no longer sit on the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll talk about it in a moment after news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The next decade. White House and EPA officials say under the proposed